Oswaldo Cabrera of the New York Yankees suffered a very gruesome looking leg injury in their Monday night win against the Seattle Mariners, and this injury was so severe that it actually required him to be put into the ambulance and be driven off of the field. Sources have confirmed that Cabrera unfortunately suffered an ankle fracture, and as of right now he's doing doctor's visits to determine the next step. The mechanism of injury in this particular case, of course, is consistent with a very serious condition known as an ankle fracture dislocation, and that's something I really want to focus on with today's video. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my channel. If you're not familiar with me, my name is Nick Gallo and I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and with my channel I take a look at sports injuries and I explain them so that they're a little bit easier to understand. I'll also go over the relevant anatomy for that injury and talk about the rehab process. If you enjoy this sort of content and you want to see more of it, please hit that thumbs up and subscribe to the channel because I will be making more of these videos in the future regarding sports injuries, rehabilitation, and other physical therapy related content. Also, if you yourself have suffered a similar injury, go ahead and comment on your experience in the comment section below. So we can see here that as Cabrera is going to slide into home plate, as he's doing this, that foot just seems to get tangled up underneath of him, putting the entire weight going through that leg in a position known as eversion and external rotation. Here I have a model of the foot and ankle, and so the ankle joint is formed by two long bones that are going to come down and form the top portion of that ankle joint. The first one is known as the tibia bone. It's also called the shin bone, and that's going to come down and form this medial malleolus, which is what we call this section right through here. On the outside here, we have the other long bone known as the fibula, and that's going to come down and form this portion of the bone known as the lateral malleolus. And finally, on the inside here, we have something known as the talus bone. Now let's go over some of the basic motions of the ankle. The first one is dorsiflexion, where a person is going to be bending their foot backwards like so. The opposite of that is when they're going to be pointing the toes downward. As we flip the model this way, when the foot is coming out into this outward position, it's known as eversion. And finally, coming on the inside here, this is inversion, and we often associate this with as being that classic ankle sprain position. Once again, as we look at the injury replay, as Cabrera is coming in, that foot is going to get tangled up underneath of him. That foot is going into an eversion position, and that foot is actually getting a lot of external rotation going through it. And you can see that as I do this, this is greatly going to put a lot of stress through that lateral and medial malleolus. Now, I talked about a very serious medical emergency known as an ankle fracture dislocation, so I want to talk about that briefly because they did unfortunately have to take him off in an ambulance. So for a person to suffer an ankle fracture dislocation, they're going to be put in a position just as we see in this video where the foot is going to be everted and there's going to be a lot of external rotation going through that leg. If the force is great enough, what it's going to lead to is it can lead to a fracture of the lateral and or the medial malleolus, as well as some other structures that are located within the leg here. And if the force is absolutely great enough, then you can see that talus bone will pop out of that ankle joint. As of right now, sources have not confirmed whether or not the ankle dislocated, but it's good to know that anytime they go into this particular position, you're going to get this type of an emergency response because of this potential diagnosis. It's also important to say that anytime a person suffers or is thought to have suffered a fracture in the lower leg like this, there is also the risk of something known as a compound or an open fracture, where the portion of the bone that is broken can go through the skin. This is absolutely also going to be a medical emergency because it opens the person up to fracture, and it also can contribute to any sort of damage to the nerve or the artery that goes through that lower leg there. So it is absolutely a medical emergency. They're going to be put in an air cast or some sort of splint like we saw in this case, and they're going to be taken immediately to the hospital and looked at, because if not, this can be a permanent problem. Once again, it has not been confirmed whether or not it was an open fracture, but the response made it seem like there was a risk of that. Typically, if somebody does suffer an open fracture, what they're going to do is they're going to have surgical intervention pretty much immediately. Because Cabrera is currently doing doctor's visits, it sounds like surgery could be a possibility. So we'll go over the most typical surgery for something known as an ankle fracture, and this is the open reduction internal fixation, or ORIF for short. This type of surgical intervention is going to be performed when the fracture is unstable or it is completely out of alignment. What they're going to do is they're going to be inserting hardware and they're going to be putting that into the bone so that it can heal in a very optimal alignment. The ankle ORIF is a fairly common procedure that we're going to see in the outpatient physical therapy realm, and it's not always the result of some sort of athletic trauma like we saw in this case. A lot of times people are going to suffer these malleolar fractures, whether they do something simple like miss the bottom step and that foot is going to cave inwards or outwards, leading to that malleolar fracture like we talked about. But basically what's going to happen is within the first 6 weeks, the person is probably going to be immobilized in a boot, and they're going to have weight-bearing precautions because the surgery needs to take time to heal properly, and you don't want to be putting weight going through the repair. Depending on how the fracture is healing and everything's going good with the surgeon follow-up visits, this is when we can start to progress that person anywhere at about 7 or 8 weeks. It depends on the person specifically, but this is when we can start to work in full weight bearing. We can start to do standing and other weight bearing types of strengthening exercises per the person's tolerance. This entire time we're going to be working on strengthening, range of motion, balance, neuromuscular control, all of those things, because we want to get this person back to where they were before the injury. When we're talking about athletes specifically, if there was no complications regarding the nerve or the artery in any sort of an open fracture situation, typically the person can return to sport at anywhere at about the 5+ month mark. So it looks like right now, unfortunately for Oswaldo Cabrera, it's going to be a lengthy recovery time moving forward, but hopefully we do not hear that he needs a surgical intervention. So if I happen to hear any updates on those doctor's visits, I'll be sure to update everybody in the comment section. And also, if you happen to hear anything, please feel free to update me as well. So we wish Cabrera the best of luck moving forward with his recovery. It certainly was a very gruesome looking injury. Sounds like he got to the hospital just in time and they were able to rule out some very serious pathology. But it looks like as of right now, there is some uncertainty as to whether or not he's going to need surgery. Thank you so much for watching my video today. If you enjoy this sort of content, I'm going to go ahead and link some of my playlists so that you can see some of the injuries that I've talked about in the past. Thank you so much again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.